Hello, and welcome to Nostalgia Marcana. I'm your host, Doug Leaf. Each episode of this podcast, we'll look back on the movies, TV, games, people, and phenomena that we still love talking about all these years later, and ask ourselves why these bits of pop culture still enchant us today. This week, we'll be revisiting...
He'd wait by the door after school. I'd come home whistling, and next thing I knew, we were tumbling backward, hunter and prey. Still nice to know someone missed me all day. Was he a toy or a tiger, partner in crime and trusted advisor? And was it all real, or did I pretend? I don't know, but he was my friend. So what was a memory? And what was a dream? And what would it matter if it's all the latter? It still was the whole world to me.
If you were to ask a person what comic strip was the greatest of all time, you're probably going to get Calvin and Hobbes as the answer every single time. It is a singular artistic vision. It's one of those rare things that kind of is inarguably the best of its medium. It's rare. It's kind of like, New York Yankees at baseball or the Beatles in music and stuff. It's like, it's an easy number one answer to pick because it's flat out wonderful. And I have yet to meet a person who isn't moved by it, who isn't sort of enraptured by it. So I'm really excited to be talking about Calvin and Hobbes today. We'll get into my memories of it, but it looms large for me. And I know it looms large for our guest. Please welcome to the show, Case Aiken.
Hi, thank you for having me on, and thank you for being down to talk about this very specific sliver of nostalgia that I feel is shared by a lot of people.
Well, Case, even before we get into your nostalgic memories, can you tell the folks here about the various podcasts you do, all of which are awesome, by the way?
Oh, thank you very much. So I am part of the Certain POV podcast network, and I host two currently with an asterisk running shows, as well as I was the dungeon master for our network-wide Star Wars D&D game that is currently on a hiatus, but we ran for about 4 years for that one, and took a pause really when it just became too hard to do completely online calls. But I host Another Pass, which is a movie and movie appreciation show. It's a show where my co-host and I talk about movies that we find fascinating but flawed and speculate on how realistically at the time of production we could have done something to steer the course in a better direction than ultimately happened. And then every 5 episodes we look at movies that actually had those kind of production issues and someone made it work. Like someone made it like a really successful piece, such as Predator. Behind the scenes, everyone just had terrible diarrhea. Almost everyone was sick. It was just a nightmare of an existence for everyone on board. But it's a classic of a movie. That's because there were a lot of people who were very creative and very committed to making a good thing happen. And that's what we try to talk about, like what could have been done for more problematic movies or movies that just didn't quite hit the mark or flopped with critics or whatever. And then my other show is Men of Steel, which is a Superman and Superman adjacent appreciation show where we talk about Superman specifically, but like the archetype of Superman, like the power fantasy that's involved and like why it's a positive experience for us. Because frankly, it's spite because so many Batman fans are like, oh, Batman's cool. He can beat anyone with prep time. Superman's lame. And my co-host and I were like, you know what? Superman's not lame. Superman's pretty cool, man. And so we talk about anything that sort of is like a fun aspect of it. So it could be Invincible or The Boys, or it could be us looking at in depth on the depth and return of Superman since this was the 30th anniversary of that, which is terrifying to say out loud. But yeah, those are the main things I'm working on.
Yeah, and wait till you to find out how old Calvin and Hobbes is.
Right.
Yeah, and I watched the video you did specifically on Stupendous Man, which was great. And we'll get into Stupendous Man as we go. So why don't we start, where we usually start. Case, tell me about what is it about Calvin and Hobbes that made you want to pick this as the subject for today?
I mean, I think that there's two parts to that, because there's why was it so resonant with me at the time when I picked it up, and then why was it a thing that I felt was a good idea for us to talk about on this. And I think that the former is really obvious. Like I was born in 1984. The strip came around a couple years later. So by the time I was of reading age, there was a little bit of a backlog, but it wasn't like that dated of a series at the time. I really connected with the character because I think I started really appreciating the series when I was in like first grade. So I was 6, and I believe that's his grade for the majority of the run. So I was like very much like, oh, I'm that exact age. And also I had an active imagination, and I really related to all of the things that are going on in it, the existence of fantasy elements that he just sort of like brings in willy-nilly into his main world, the imaginary friend, the desire to explore nature, and the kind of isolation that exists in childhood if you don't have like a lot of friends very close to your house growing up. Like those were all like pieces that, like, yeah, of course it made sense that it connected with 6-year-old me, because it's a series that was like exactly designed for people like me at that time. But why I thought it was good to bring up now is that I've been seeing that it is really resonating with a lot of people. And as a result, it's been on my mind a lot these days. There are Facebook groups dedicated to people making memes using Calvin and Hobbes strips, which are hilarious. There are just tons of people like doing videos and like video essays and just like thought pieces about like why Calvin and Hobbes was relevant or whatever. And I had like my own personal like reconnection just right before this. Like you mentioned, I did a video on Stupendous Man, Calvin's Superman like fantasy that he goes through. And you know what? Like I was already like primed for all these other things with like, again, the memes and everything, and rereading a bunch of strips. I'm like, oh, right. These are amazing. Like this is a series that's just so fantastic and so open about the artistic process. It's a series that it's widely known a lot of what went into making the strip, because there was the very well received 10th anniversary book where Bill Watterson, the creator of the book, went by many of the major strips and storylines and like explained the thought process, explained what he was trying to do, went into, you know, huge depth in terms of the behind the scenes stuff. It was like a director's commentary track for DVDs that would become very popular right after that. But for a literary work, for for the sequential art thing, which has so much thought going into it. And so it's my kind of nerdom, but like honestly, the internet is allowing us all to kind of find that kind of nerdom that we all share, which is like that like hyperfixation and like really appreciation of like the entire process of it all. And people are really jiving with it, and it just seemed like a good thing to talk about, because I feel like so many of us are having this like renaissance with the work because it holds up so well.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the occasional moment where Calvin talks about like we need to rent a VCR, the thing is really evergreen, right? There's nothing in it that is, you know, out of time, or something that an audience from 2023 couldn't relate to. It's just, this is, I think, just it hits something universal, to kind of jump to the end of the podcast, but like it hits something like about all of our childhoods. Like I was going back and looking at this, and I've been reading it with my 7-year-old daughter, and that's been just, you know, kind of an emotional just punch every time. I'm just super excited to pull the thing out and look at it. For me, like as a kid growing up in the 80s, I wanted to be a cartoonist first. That was the first job I ever wanted when I was little. And, setting aside just the extraordinary quality of the artwork, there's something about his just constant flights of fancy that what really resonated with me. Like, yeah, like you, I was a kid with a big overactive imagination, and I look at a lot of the media I consumed back then, and it's, you look at something like, I don't know, Muppet Babies, and it's kind of the same thing where it's like, every episode are these characters using their imaginations to go, to be superheroes or explore space or do whatever. And all of that stuff really connected with me. But there's also like a lot of heart and a lot of like more sophisticated thought going on, even though half of the strips are, Hobbes just, beating up Calvin basically and him vowing revenge, things like that are not highbrow. But behind all of that, there is some highbrow stuff going on. So there's sort of a lot for everybody to sort of link into for Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, I think that it's easy to assume that the main thrust of the piece is the fact that like the and Hobbes part, and that the easy assessment of the character is it's his imaginary friend, like it's his imagination operating, and that kind of links into one of the facets of the strip, which is these like flights of fancy that Calvin goes on. And it's true, that's shared by a lot of media over the course of all media, but particularly like 80s and 90s stuff. Like Doug has that sort of element to it. Scrubs has that element to it. My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has that element to it, where like all the songs are her flights of fancy kind of situation. So like it's been done and it's been iterated upon, and we've seen lots of takes on that, and that's a fun thing. It's a fun conceit as long as the rest of it really works. The thing that's like really impressive though is that when you take a step back from that, like what does it allow for, like all the different ways that the series like explores humor. Like there's all the sight gags that are like so complex in some areas, like all the snowman gags, like that really are like these artistic jokes that are really like working with it all. You know, there's the wagon ride strips, which are all the ones where he's like going down the hill with Hobbes, and they're having like deep philosophical discussions about like morality or humanity and so forth. And that's a scenario where, typically speaking, the amount of chaos that they're about to hit is usually based around like where in this like kind of philosophical conversation they've gotten to the point where like they hit a cliff or a rock or whatever, exactly like at the moment where like something gets derailed or something like that. Like there's all these like levels to it that are afforded by some very basic conceits, and some of them aren't even really required to be like flights of fancy, that again, a lot of them are afforded by this conceit, but like it's like it's so much more than that, and it's such it is such an apex of the art form, the craft of making a comic strip. Like you mentioned that like it's hard for anyone to say that this is not the best comic strip, and I don't imagine that it's everyone's favorite. Like it's probably my favorite, but there are other ones that I have really strong feelings for, and there are other comic strips that I'm sure hit better for a lot of people. But it's kind of like a Watchmen in a certain way, where it may not be your favorite comic, it may not be your favorite thing of this form, but it is definitely one of the most like thought-provoking, but like thought-intensive projects to put together. Like the amount of effort that Watterson was putting into the piece in terms of subverting tropes, directly commenting on things, like reflecting on the sources for why he wanted to do a comic strip like this. And then doing like all these like very elaborate different art styles to sort of convey it all, and like these different humor formats. Like it's very different. The direct comparison is Garfield, like where Garfield is very rigid formatted to the point where there's like Garfield randomizers where it'll just put random strips of Garfield to see how well the jokes work together, because like Garfield kind of just works that way, versus the intricate details that sort of require the setup and payoff of every Calvin and Hobbes strip is so much more elaborate and profound, to the point that Watterson actually like quit or you know like took hiatuses and went through intense negotiations with the comic strip syndicate in order to be able to express himself as artistically as possible in as little of a rigid format as possible. It's a really impressive piece in just the meta narrative on top of it, and then again it actually pulls it off.
Yeah, I mean, he earned the clout to be able to exercise that level of control, where you look at it and you go, man, you know, this should have been merchandised to death, right? There should have been an animated series. Everyone should have been able to go out and buy a Hobbes plush. I saw, at least on Wikipedia, I don't know how reliable it is, but someone had analyzed it and thought he might have foregone $300 to $400 million for the sake of artistic integrity by saying, no, I don't want this merchandise. There's the books, and that's it. You know, there's basically nothing. There's no, you know, Calvin and Hobbes day calendars like there were for the Far Side. Like there's none of that stuff.
Like imagine an animated series of Calvin and Hobbes coming out roughly when it would have, based on the spike of popularity. So probably we're talking like 89, 90. Like that would have been a direct competitor with The Simpsons. And like Hobbes and Bart were often compared during like the heyday of both The Simpsons as a TV show and Calvin and Hobbes as a cartoon strip. Like like it's easy to get limited in talking about Calvin and Hobbes and why it like stuck with people in the context of the comic strips of the time or the written format, but like there was like in the zeitgeist the desire for this sort of red t-shirted like kind of a brat boy archetype, really exploring it like an imperfect like boy protagonist,
Dennis the Menace, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Same thing. Yeah. And you mentioned Bart Simpson, like there's something about this like, oh, what a little rapscallion he is, and he is. But there's so much more going on with him than just the fact that he's constantly misbehaving, right? If that's all he was just kind of this little shit, it wouldn't connect. It wouldn't have the heart that it has. And because what you sort of see with him is like, yes, he's misbehaving a lot, but it's sort of this like bigger overarching, again, is like his overactive imagination. Like there's something else, this desire for something more that he as a 6-year-old, he can't really even contain. And he's obviously much brighter than he seems to be at school, right? Like they always show him he's failing every test, but I learned so many vocabulary words just by reading this strip, right? He speaks at such an elevated level. And the heart that's there, that's rare for a comic strip as well. Like we did an episode on The Far Side, which has none. And by design, that's just not what it's for. Bloom County, I love a whole bunch. That has some. Calvin and Hobbes knows how to, to use lame kid speak, hit you in the feels.
Yeah.
But it really does. Like there are episodes where like, he is, profoundly sad or frightened and like Hobbes is there for him. And like it ends with just like, oh, it's a simple like hug, or they're like snuggling by a warm fire. And
yeah, like it's hard to imagine doing like a very special episode with a comic strip, but somehow Calvin and Hobbes did it. Like there's two big ones that stand out to me, which is the burglary when their house is broken into, and Calvin can't find Hobbes. And then the baby raccoon. And these are like the dog episodes of like Futurama. Like, like they're the ones that hit you really hard and that everyone kind of remembers, but they're sort of sad that they do. But there's no joke. It's just the intense like sadness and worry of this boy, and the characters who often have like antagonistic relationships with him, like his parents, are there and fully emotional and fully supportive. And you see that this dynamic, which is very true to childhood. Like there is that element of like trying to test your boundaries and the parents being the figures to like pull you back. And like, they're funny in their own ways, but like they're disciplinarians. But here you actually see the flip side, the caretaker, the thing that doesn't make for a good comic strip normally. And the decision to actually like go there. Like it's one thing for the strip to be about like, Calvin comes home and gets like tackled by Hobbes every time. It's like, isn't that funny? But like to have that juxtaposition and then have these like severe emotional moments, like that is a ballsy strip.
That's what's made it last so long.
Yeah.
I think, we wouldn't be talking about it today if it didn't do that, because it makes those in between moments where, Calvin's getting tackled by Hobbes, he's beat up by Mo at school, kind of these beats that they would do over and over again. They would feel stale if they didn't have this stuff in them, because it makes the relationship between Calvin and Hobbes, or the other characters as well, feel much more three-dimensional. And so, it's much more endearing when Hobbes pounces on Calvin as he comes home, because, he's basically like a big dog.
Right.
And, there's a love there between the two of them. It wouldn't be the same as just like Garfield kicking Odie off the table over and over again. That has no soul, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's something about this aspect of the strip that is what's given it its immortality, I think. Is it that we all sort of connect with Calvin and Hobbes a lot more. Now, you did mention about this should have been an animated series, and there was pressure.
I'm not saying it should have been. I'm just saying, like, can you imagine if it had?
Oh yeah,
like
that's what I mean.
I truly think that the strip form of this is the apex of what it was meant to be. Like there's so much thought put into the medium of comic strips. Like I don't think it would translate to a different media without a severe change, and like you'd have to like really think it through.
Yeah, it's funny because, when you read it, I was trying to think if I had like voices for them in my head. And when I've been reading it to my daughter, like usually she doesn't want me to do like cartoon voices for them, but it made me think about it a lot and go like, I don't know if I had to like cast this thing, like what does Hobbes sound like? What does Calvin sound like? These different characters. And I was curious if like when you read it, do you have, what they sound like in your head?
Kind of like it's almost like a half voice of it all. Like you can kind of get like the tone and the like the relative tenor, but I don't necessarily have like a specific person's voice that I would ascribe it to. There's the archetypes are so strong that I don't need to like necessarily have like it be a specific person that's like going into that spot, because it's such a broad range that would have been like kind of fine. So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I know what wouldn't sound right, but I couldn't tell you necessarily.
And it's
what
almost everything,
right. Or it sounds
like
wrong.
Because I've seen they've done like animated Bloom County things, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like Opus, the penguin. Like it's just not right. Whatever, no matter what you do, somehow it doesn't match what's in your head. And like, so trying to do this for my daughter, I was like, I don't know, what should Hobbes sound like? I was like, if in reality it would probably be like Billy West, but like, I don't know if Fry is the right voice for Hobbes. Like it doesn't work. And so, yeah, I was just trying to wrap my brain around, like, I think it would be a casting nightmare to try and do. I don't envy, I don't want to say you couldn't actually do a Calvin and Hobbes animated show and have it be good, because, with the right creativity, anything can be good, but it does seem like you said, this is kind of the apotheosis of what this thing is already.
Yeah, although now I'm like thinking like I'm blanking on the actor's name right now, but he was Patrick the Starfish on SpongeBob.
Bill Fagerbaki.
Yeah, okay, there we go. For Hobbes, I think if he was playing a very erudite version of that character, like because he so often plays the big dumb guy, but like if he's like a very smart version of that, I feel like that would actually do Hobbes pretty well. But also probably like a little bit higher pitch, because it's got to be like a kid-ish. Like Hobbes is very smart, but he's still like a kid tiger, or at least that's like the vibe of the series.
Yeah, I can't even tell how old relative to Calvin Hobbes is supposed to be, because he does show more like interest in girls and stuff. Like he the Calvin would not go for. Like, so I don't know if he's meant to be like an adult tiger, but it doesn't really matter because he's whatever Calvin sort of needs him to be.
Yeah, like I mean, like you said, there's a very much of like a boy and his dog kind of vibe with their relationship, which is nice, but like dogs mature faster. So like, like regardless like of how young you are or like how young you get the dog, like a good portion of the relationship of the boy with the dog will be the dog in some state of maturity beyond like where the boy is at, regardless of like where the intellectual levels are. And like in Hobbes's case, he's like very clearly supposed to be smarter, a little bit more mature, a little bit chiller. He does have those sort of impulses. So like, is he older? Is he just a tiger? The fact that we're talking about this is kind of insane, because it's also like, is he even a real thing? Like, who can really say? Like, he's some sort of representation of like how Calvin sees kind of a big brother type, I guess would be the best way to say it.
Yeah, it's definitely the brother he doesn't have, because he is an only child. And as you said, he's sort of isolated. He doesn't have any other friends. He's sometimes friends with Susie, but not much. His next door neighbor. Mostly he torments her, but she's the only one who seems to spend any time with him at school other than Mo the bully.
Yeah.
So there is something to that of like, this kid is, he's not antisocial exactly, but like he isn't getting along with his peers. Like he is.
I think it's fair to say he's antisocial. Like he very clearly doesn't want to do sports. The one time it really like comes up, he is very much like an outcast in his school settings. Every time there's like any presentation of like a group project or him working with anyone, everyone always like treats him as being like the weird kid. So like I get that. I mean like if you really want to get into it, like, this is very much, it resonates with a lot of people, because here's a representation of like a neurodivergent child. Like it very much fits for a lot of people who are grappling with that, especially when they don't necessarily like fit into these like sort of like, like Flanderized like archetypes of like what those things of neurodivergence like feels like. So like all these people who are like somewhere in all the various spectrums, find a character who like, oh yeah, that actually kind of fits. And it was an early one for us and a really well done version of that.
It's an interesting way to look at it. I had not ever considered him as like neurodivergent, but you're right. There is something to that, the way he can't quite relate to his peers. Like
I mean, I think ADHD like
them,
hits
maybe.
really obviously right there, and like, there's such a spectrum of things that it could be specifically, but like a lot that spectrum still will find a point of resonance.
Yeah. There's a lot of recurring bits throughout the strip. Are there any that like are some of your favorites?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like the fun of the series is the number of types of bits it has. So we've talked a lot about like the Flights of Fancy, where he like will be interpreting the world through some sort of like artificial kind of setting. So like some of them are him playing a protagonist in a specific type of story. So we mentioned Stupendous Man before. There's Spaceman Spiff, which is sort of like a sci-fi kind of setting. And I'm blanking on the name of the noir detective character at the moment.
Tracer Bullet.
Tracer Bullet, that's it. Where they do everything in like a very high contrast, like mostly shadows kind of art style. All of that's like one great sect of it. There's tons of dinosaur stuff, and that's always fun. There's all the box gags that are fantastic, like doing the transmogrifier or the duplicator. And then my personal favorite of those although the time travel ones are really fun also, but like my personal favorite is the moral version of the duplicator, where it creates a purely good version of Calvin that is so offended at the evil that Calvin puts out there in the world that they get into a fight. And because of his desire to beat up Calvin for being such a douchebag, he blinks out of existence because he's supposed to be just good, and he can't actually have that level of evil that's inspired by his justified rage at this person. That's probably my favorite right there. But again, like the snowman gags are so good. There's so many good visual ones, like just the dancing ones where like Watterson, the Sunday strips are so strong because he does this like really rich like watercolor kind of design for everything. Particularly once we get later and he's able to like do like unique formats. So he'll do really intricate like art pieces that in some cases will be like broader visual gags. There'll be, like alien vistas and like really cool stuff going on with that. And sometimes it'll just be like, here's a representation of them dancing, and it will be all these different frames of animation that you could easily see being turned into like a flip book or something. And there's just such like wonderful moments where like the art itself is taking over this whole thing, which has such good wordplay and has such good pacing and timing. Like it's just such a well-rounded package, and it's impressive that Watterson gave each one of those aspects places to shine in the types of humor that was being put out there.
Yeah, I love all of the ones you mentioned. Those are all great. I enjoy Club Gross, get rid of slimy girls.
Right, yeah.
The S at the end. The best part of which is just the fact that Hobbes, as quote-unquote dictator for life, insists that Calvin continually recite these longer and longer ridiculous oaths or pledges of allegiance to the club. Those are always really funny because you get the impression that, like, Jesus, this thing has like 15 stanzas that he has to do every time. I always like those. Those are cute. But yeah, the snowman gags are super strong. And there's the yearly trip to the cabin or no, the lake. They go to this lake with their dad. That's this miserable camping trip every time, which I do not particularly care for camping. So like I could relate to this. My family was not too outdoorsy either, but I did a little of it. But I was like, yeah, there's something really fun about like this. The poor dad is the only one trying to have fun, and mom and Calvin are just not having it.
Mm-hmm. Another good running gag in the whole series is Calvin's dad using his knowledge of the world to mess with Calvin by lying to him. Or
the color one. Yeah,
the reverse ones, which are even better, are the ones where Calvin's dad says the truth to Calvin, and Calvin can't tell for sure if his dad's messing with him or not, and is left in a like state of anxiety where he can't tell reality from fiction. I'm thinking about the record one where like Calvin's dad is like, if you look at the 2 points, even though they're in a line, one's technically going faster than the inner
the inner one goes slower than the outer one. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. And it was just like, oh my God. And like, that's so great because it's such a reverse of like all these ones where, like you said, like the color one where it's like, oh yeah, well no paintings were black and white paint because the world was in black and white, but all photographs were actual color photos of a black and white world. And like, that's such a good gag from the character.
And that kind of mirrors the other kind of gag where, so that's Calvin's dad messing with him. Calvin will then go mess with his dad by constantly telling him that he's doing poorly in the polls.
Right.
Like that's a great gag for a 6-year-old to tell him, like, oh no, you need, basically, you need to give us more ice cream or whatever. That'll help your Q rating, or however he phrases it. That stuff is just really genuinely funny. That it's amazing he's able to kind of do these bits and repeat them so many times and still kind of find new ways to iterate on them without them becoming stale.
Yeah, and like it's a impressive work in that it is so not serialized. Everything is so self-contained, minus the fact that there's like, story arcs in there usually, but at the same time there is a larger narrative. Like all of these strips are so functional as standalone pieces, but then when you look at this broader sequence, like obviously there's like the like specific stories, but like there are those pieces that keep coming back together and like around in interesting new ways, like Calvin Ball. Like there's an origin to Calvin Ball, and then we see like new permutations of it all. Exactly. I have a rugby shirt that I've sadly outgrown for a Calvin Ball shirt, and like that was like fantastic game. The various forms of the transmogrifier, like I alluded to the fact that the duplicator got iterated upon so that you have like the moral version of it. Like that's pretty cool that like we're able to have jokes that are callbacks to earlier ones, and how it keeps building and like coming up with this new fun way. And, the fact that the series ended on a really positive note that like encouraged all of this sort of iterating upon ideas and all that, sort of some like summarizing its whole ethos, is a big reason why it's going to keep resonating for us. Like each one of those like really cool story points meant a lot to us, worked so well, was so funny, and we're being told there's so much there's even more out there. Like it's like putting it in our hands to like appreciate, adore, and create more, even beyond that point.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the way it ends, which is this strip that was December 31, I think 1995, and it's just Calvin and Hobbes walking through a snowy forest, about to go sledding, and basically just ends with them saying, "Let's go exploring."
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to send off the strip, because, like you said, yeah, it obviously leaves you wanting more, but that is that exploration, that concept is so much at the heart of what makes Calvin and Hobbes work. That whether it is these literal flights of fantasy where he's pretending he's stuck in a cubist world, or that gravity's gone into reverse, or there's so many of them, but it is all about Calvin exploring and trying to understand his world through exploration. Then that this sort of like exhortation for us to do the same is it's just a beautiful way to bring that plane in for a landing.
Yeah, like we've referenced the wagon rides, but the backyard is such an iconic part of the Calvin and Hobbes franchise. Like the backyard or like local forest or whatever it is, like there seems to be this infinite forest
wilderness.
Exactly, like this 100-acre woods style place that Calvin and Hobbes can just escape to for all of their adventures, and it seems to be a place that they can just keep on going, but at the same time mom's just off screen able to yell for them, and it's just them by themselves. So there's rarely interactions with any sort of like element of nature beyond like, a couple times with like birds or bees. And then of course like the raccoon incident, but for the most part, it's just like this sort of like safe, like there's just a lot of trees around and it's like nice. And they get to explore it and like be philosophical. That's such a huge part of the series. Like it's so like, it's such an image of childhood that resonates so well, even when you're a child. Like when I was 6, I was like, I want that moment of like pure being a child there. Like it's an aspirational aspect. And like looking back as an adult, you're like, oh yeah, those are those like best moments where you're just like hanging out with your friends in the woods and there seems to be like no one else around and you're just in this space in nature.
There's the book, one of the books, collections that was put out called, I think, The Days Are Just Packed.
Yeah.
And it's just them, the cover image is just them sitting in a tree or something in the middle of the woods, just kind of relaxed, implying that, no, when you're a kid, it feels like summer just goes on forever. and the world goes on for, like, and I didn't grow up in a wilderness. I grew up in a Southern California suburb by the ocean, but there was kind of pockets of that, just enough to be like, okay, well, I can't really wander off into the canyon because there's like snakes and coyotes and stuff, but there was that sense of like, I had something like this in my backyard and I desperately wanted to explore it. Like there was this, that again, that feeling as a kid that like this goes on forever. There is this world out there that we can wander through and have adventures in. And that, again, like just feels like it goes to the soul of being a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, likewise, I didn't have like a forest that I could like go to as a kid, but like, I mean, even just like hiding in the bushes outside of like the front of my parents' house, like feels like that kind of like natural kind of escape where like in this like space that is just yours. And like, I think that's such a cool part of the series because like all of what we see in the strip is not supposed to be taken literally. Like, even the stuff where it seems to be Calvin with his parents and everything seems like completely mundane, there's still a point of view in place. Like, we never find out his parents' names. We know very little about their actual existence. We know very little about the circumstances because it's all from Calvin's perspective of like, well, what is relevant to it all? Like, Watterson even admitted that he regrets giving Uncle Max as a character because it was like an attempt to have a character with a name and an identity, and that was like too much for like the 6-year-old perspective of this world. Like, that said, Uncle Max has had incredible life in post strip memes that are going on right now. Like, if you're on Facebook, check out Calvin and Hobbes spiff posting. It's incredible. Like, there have been amazing strips that people have put together with all of these like weird like secondary characters because they kind of can just be used in any particular way and it doesn't really matter. It's really funny. And Max is one of those.
Do you have any? I mean, there are, a fair number of secondary characters, not a lot. And in fact, most of them were introduced real early in the series and that's it. That's kind of the universe. But are there any favorites in there?
I mean, so like Susie obviously has this place as being the main female character and like the one that like you kind of ship a little bit. Like, there is an implication that it's like the boy's crush on her is why he like kind of like tries to like tease her and like poke fun at her, like kind of stuff. There was a series, I forget the name of it now, but it was done in the style of Calvin and Hobbes, as if Calvin and Susie had gotten married and had a daughter. I
saw that.
Yeah, it was really popular. It ran for like, I think it was only like a handful of actual like strips that were put out. They were like done in like the format of like Sunday strips, but as a webcomic. But I think they like stopped being done in respect to like Watterson's wishes or something like that. But it was very tasteful and like very like it was like this like fun future version of this where like their daughter was given Hobbes, and so like this sub shipping that people kind of had of Calvin and Susie actually like played out. So there is always that. I think Rosalind is an interesting one from the perspective of like, if you're a teenager and you know what it's like to babysit a kid like that, you're like, oh, I get it. And that's probably the first one that you really like sort of feel like of the rest of them. Like Miss Wormwood, I love the name. Every now and then there are moments where I'm like, oh, what else is going on in your life, Miss Wormwood? Like, like looking back at this character who like as a kid I'm like, oh yeah, it's just the evil teacher, but like there are comments that she has when she's dealing with Calvin where you're like, oh, that there's some three-dimensionality to it that you kind of miss when on your first reading of it all. But then the dad, and part of that is, yeah, I'm a new dad, but like he's having so much fun making fun of his son behind his back. Like they're like Calvin's dad as the figure who will tease him, will ramble about like his interest in biking, will comment on his snow art, and then every now and then they'll have like a snowball fight and actually have like these really like sweet scenes together. That's such a like a well-rounded three-dimensional character, and like the mom gets some of that, but she doesn't quite have the eccentricities of the dad. Like the dad has like, the dad's a nerd in his own right. Like the dad looks a lot like the stock image that everyone knows of like Bill Watterson, but like he's multifaceted, and in a way that we get to see, whereas the mom probably has more stuff going on, but like we don't really see a lot about like her hobbies or interests, relatively speaking. And so it's just like kind of fun to have this like parent who gives as good as he gets with Calvin.
Yeah, they definitely go out of their way to show you, like you said, his eccentricities, his sort of like lame interest, or at least that they're lame to Calvin, and his attempt, like something I can super relate to now as a dad, is like his constant efforts to try and like introduce Calvin to things he thinks are interesting, and Calvin's complete shutting that down. I cannot tell you how many times I have tried to get my kids to like watch some movie or, you know, read something, and I'm like, this is cool. You have no idea. And I'm like, oh, they're just not old enough yet to be open to those things. But like watching Calvin's dad kind of struggle with that, like, no, this is good. You're going to like this. And like, nope, no. So it just felt so true to life. And I wonder how much of that is, you know, Bill Watterson's real father in there. But you're right. He is probably the most well-rounded character outside of Calvin and Hobbes themselves.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, all the characters are pretty, you know, well established, but like in terms of like this like full, you know, this I contain multitudes, like the dad's the one who has all of that going on.
Did you ever I was kind of interested because when I was reading this, of course, I had no idea who Calvin and Hobbes were. Their namesake philosophers, but I went back and I looked at it and was like, oh, there is something of that to them, that they do sort of embody parts of those two guys' worldviews. Like, so, I mean, Calvin, for example, the main thing people associate with him is predeterminism, right? That, you know,
yeah,
if God is infinitely powerful, therefore everything's already been mapped out in advance. And, you know, whether you're going to hell or not, that's all been predetermined. And that in that lies a certain kind of anarchistic freedom that Calvin embodies, which is like, well, doesn't matter what I do, because, you know, it's all going to work out however it's supposed to work out anyway. That he definitely takes that approach. And Hobbes is more the philosopher Hobbes is all about the social contract.
Right.
And you see that in Hobbes the Tiger as well. He's the one who's always trying to pull Calvin back down to earth a little bit and go like, well, you know, this seems like we're not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah, I mean, like, like there are of course like moments where like Calvin's saying like I deserve X, Y, or Z thing just to happen to me because of who I am, and so there is certainly like a case to be made for that. Yeah, I think there's also just like kind of it's certainly possible, and like Watterson was like extremely explicit of like that he chose those names because of the people that they're like coming from, like the historical figures, and like sure it there's certainly elements of that. I think that like it's kind of, you have to like squint to make it all work.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if you look at the actual writings of like Hobbes, it's much more like, you know, well, we all need basically a sovereign overlord to tell us what to do to have any kind of system of government. And it's like, well, that's a bit much. But that doesn't quite fit with Hobbes the Tiger's worldview either. So you're right about having to like squint to make it work. But it is kind of interesting that there's a little bit of that, just a soupçon of this philosophical stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like, because like it could be that connection, but there's like, that's the A and the C points there, that like there's some kind of idea in the middle of it. Like because like where Hobbes kind of like lines up with the historical Hobbes, like, is a perspective of the inferiority of humanity. But that's because he's a tiger in the case of the cartoon strip Hobbes. And so it's like, it could work just fine. It could be like a Shark Tale scenario of all the mobsters are the sharks kind of thing, like where like you figured out how that all kind of makes sense. But there is that filter in place there for those ideas. And I'm not saying that it's not possible that it would work that way, because Lord knows our brains are weird, and like we make these like kind of random associations on how to like put it together. And like, wouldn't it be funny if the reason they said this was because of this, like, kind of logic could make sense there. But again, there is that like filter in place.
As I go back to it now, as an adult, as a parent, I find myself kind of, marveling at how they take this kid who is, you would hold up as, he's the bad influence. He's a bad example, right? He's constantly, destroying things, misbehaving, making trouble. But you still make him your hero, and like, you root for him despite all of that stuff. And you sort of find like the good in him over and over again. Like, it's a neat kind of balancing act that they do with that. And maybe it's because they have Hobbes there to kind of like be sort of that reflection of his better angels, but it's tricky.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be difficult in general to have a lead character in a series be fully bad. And I think that this is we talked about it earlier with like the Dennis the Menace kind of archetype. It is interesting to have an exploration of a character who is so flawed in a way that is like ultimately harmless. Like Calvin is shown to be a moral character when it comes to the really important stuff, or at the very least to have sympathy for like when bad things occur. But like the idea of a brat is kind of engaging because it allows you to have not like this like perfect like angel of a protagonist. Like you can have like situations that are their fault. Like the source of comedy can be all their faults, but you can't just have them be bad all the time. If they're unrepentant, then there's nothing really to like work with. But like we kind of glom on to those moments where Calvin is either a scared child and we feel like a parent to him, or where he actually is sympathetic, and like even if he's just remorseful for being mean to Susie. Like those are the moments where we see actual growth. Like there is growth with his relationship with Rosalind over time, to the point where she actually engages in Calvin Ball, like where those are moments of the characters kind of becoming more advanced and changing a little bit, because again, like he's always going to be 6, but we get to see that this is a character who is not just someone we should write off. It's someone who we want to see succeed and become a better person. But we also are going to laugh at these terrible moments for the character. And like, because most of the misfortune for him is something that he brings on himself.
Oh yeah. By and large, it's his attempts to try and get away with something that like as a kid, like no, you're going to have to take a bath, kid. Like you can only put that off for so long. Right.
Yeah.
And so but they also sort of combine that with funny moments, and you could see behind the scenes, like, okay, there's all the ones where he's trying to get out of the tub, but there's also all the ones where he's like, his mother or somebody has come up with an idea that would make him want to stay in there.
Yeah.
Right. Or so like with like eating, they do this bit where like the food that they eat is always drawn as this incomprehensible Lovecraftian glop. And like, there's a classic one where usually it involves the thing like jumping off the plate. He's refusing to eat it. He's gagging. He's making faces. But then there's one where his dad or his mom tells him like, it's, oh no, that's like spider eyeballs. And then he's like, ooh, I want to eat it. And he goes for it. And like, it's that kind of stuff where it's like, oh, when the parents lean into his proclivities, that like you again, like, you create a comedy moment, but you kind of redeem Calvin a little bit, and you like strengthen the bonds he has with his parents through those moments.
Yeah. I think that sort of plays into my earlier statements of him being, if not neurodivergent, like the weird kid, and like finding ways to relate to them through where like the sort of like cut and dried, here's like the expected family relationships aren't working, and where they like lean into it. That is a really interesting element, and like sort of like a plea for parents to understand their children better, even if they come off that way. Between scheduling this all like was a relatively quick period of time for the listeners at home, but I did have a chance to review a bunch of Calvin and Hobbes stuff. And one of the things I was looking at, my sister for Christmas last year got me this wonderful bound like reprinted version of Calvin and Hobbes, like the whole run.
It's that brown one, right?
Yep.
That big 3-volume thing. Yeah, I have that.
4-volume thing. Yeah.
Oh, is it 4? I have one that's 3, but it's the same thing.
It's heavy as hell.
Yeah.
But so I was reviewing the last couple strips because like the last strip like sticks with me for a whole bunch of reasons. Like it's wonderful to start with, but like I actually have a signed copy of it from Bill Watterson with like a lovely note because my aunt knew I was such a huge fan. Like she wrote to him and like asked him to send that. And it was, just like a wonderful note from the creator of a series that really meant something to me. But to like look at the other things leading up to it, like I was like, oh wait, what was the week before? What was the, like what were the last couple strips like of Calvin and Hobbes, if you weren't thinking about just the last strip? And the second to last Sunday strip is the Christmas strip, because the last strip is the New Year strip. And it's Santa being given by the elves Calvin's dossier. And like the whole strip is them like going over like if he's a naughty boy or a nice boy for the purposes of getting gifts, and like what kind of like crazy list Calvin submitted to Santa Claus. And it cuts off with like Calvin like waking up from the dream of imagining this like whole debate going on between Santa and the elves, and saying that he can't stand the tension. And like what's fantastic about that as the penultimate like color strip for the series is that is Watterson saying, who can really say if Calvin's a good boy or a bad boy? Like where does he fall on the moral spectrum? A thing that is honestly an open debate for the entirety of the series, like, is left up to us for how we rule on the matter, because they point out there's all these things he did, but there's also all these extenuating circumstances, and there's all these like other elements. And when they mention it, it's like, yes, the noodle incident, boy, you know, that thing that happened that they allude to all the time, but we're never allowed to see, which is one of the best things about the series that I can't believe we haven't said anything about yet. It's so good. The noodle incident is so good. But Santa is in the scenario with these elves not able to honestly determine, because every single thing has a caveat. Like everything good he does was for a bad reason, and everything bad he does probably had a good reason, frankly, with Calvin. And so you end up with a scenario where Watterson is asking you, the audience, to decide, or decide not to care, like, because that he has elements of both in him. And that's, you know, a good note on where does the character end up. He's still somewhere teetering back and forth, because he is a child who could grow up to be anything. And then the next Sunday strip after that is, the world is a blank canvas, let's go exploring. You know, it's two sides of it. It's the philosophical versus the imaginative side of the series. And I really adore that was a conscious decision made in wrapping up this decade long series.
I would put him as chaotic neutral. I think that's probably where I would go. Yeah, I mean, I think that is, you're right. Over the long haul of it, the full 10 years of this experiment, it is a lot of, asking you as the reader to figure out, all right, is he good? Is he evil? How do you feel about this kid, right? Is he just, hey, he's a little stinker and that's funny? Or is there something more going on? And I think that's why those heartfelt ones we've touched on are so important, because they tip the scale so far back towards good, that make it, you understand Calvin's thought process so much more than if he was just a truly as two-dimensional as he is drawn. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I guess we never do find out what the noodle incident is, but they do reference it many times.
Right. No, it's explicitly a joke that we just will never figure it out, because it's funnier in our heads, whatever it could be. Right.
Gosh, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else we need to say about Calvin and Hobbes here as we're bringing it home? Why do you think it is that, this thing's stopped running at the very end of 1995. Here we are in 2023. And this thing just, it's survived. Like, people will go out and buy this legacy collection for their kids. Like, this comic strip will endure forever. What do you think it is about it that has connected with so many people?
I mean, as we alluded to before, it's timeless, and it's so earnest for like the type of work that it is, relative to plenty of strips that were out there at the time. But like I think it just hit at the right spot where it had enough meta knowledge, but it was still playing by the old rules. It was kind of the apex of like that regular newspaper comic strip. Like, while there are plenty of good ones that came after it, like, this was the one that I clearly identified this format that had been going for the 20th century, and not really before that. Like, while there were political cartoons before that, like, the comic strip is very much a 20th century kind of thing, and this was the strip that sort of like capped off that period. And then everything that comes after it is starting to deal with shifts in how people appreciate it, like shifts in more people appreciating it from from trade paperbacks, or like the collections of it, moving on to online strips, changing all of those things that have changed with the art form. Those are challenges that Calvin and Hobbes never had to deal with in any way. It was able to just flourish as the best example of this particular art form before the art form had to change in really dramatic ways.
I think you're right. I think, it would be hard for something like Calvin and Hobbes to get a toehold now, partially because of the way we consume media, which is like you used to just, this thing would be in the newspaper. You would all get I would remember every morning, sitting down with the comics page and reading Calvin and Hobbes and all these other strips that I really liked. But this was always my favorite every time. And I think it is sort of the apex of the art form, like you said. Like, there are comics that I enjoy on the web that I will go find. You have like your Perry Bible Fellowships and things like that are very clever. They're very well drawn. They can be very interesting. But there's something about having these recurring characters that are so endearing and so heartfelt. And the subject matter is such a arrow straight to everybody's core, because everybody was a child. And there's the thesis of this whole thing is about what it means to be a child, what the world looks like from a child's point of view, whereas most comic strips are more about the adult world, the horrors that we face politically, the just quirky weirdness of our intersexual politics, all of the strange stuff we have to deal with. Very little of it is about girls have cooties, and kind of going back to that, kind of back to basics, is what Calvin and Hobbes does. It goes to this super universal experience and makes it meaningful and kind of noble in a strange way. There's something about watching Calvin struggle that, there's this feeling of we all went through this, and there is there is a place where we all started as these kind of fairly innocent kids that is you want to return to over and over again.
Yeah, it also was allowed to flourish the way that Watterson wanted it to flourish. It wasn't bowing to the pressures of the publications in a lot of very real ways. Like I said before, Watterson took hiatuses while he was doing renegotiations of contracts to really fight for his rights as a creator. A big one is the Sunday strips used to have a very rigid format for how it would be published, so that it could be chopped up into specific configurations, and he had fought so that he didn't have to do that, because it was giving him framework where he had to write the strip in a certain way. The first two panels had to be related but not required to understand the rest of the strip, kind of stuff. And he fought to be able to do his format however he saw fit. The fact that he wasn't bowing to merchandise pressures and so forth, all of those things allowed for the character to flourish the way he wanted it to, and not have to be have the rough edges smoothed out because of corporate pressures, to not have the character have a catchphrase that was super important to him. Not that it's unique that a work would comment on that. The Simpsons did a whole episode of the I didn't do it boy episode, but that was a big risk at the time. Look at what happened with Urkel, for example. Calvin very easily could have been that kind of a mascot kind of character that would have been really popular for 18 months and then kind of faded away. But instead we get to have this very touching version of a character who is a shitty kid. He's terrible. You would not want to be his parents, but if he was crying, you absolutely would console him. To have this very real child living in a fantasy world that we kind of all relate to, because we all did too. That endures in a way that he wouldn't if he was turned more into an action figure,
or say a sticker of him peeing on something.
Right. Yeah.
Which, for the record, not a Bill Watterson drawing that was co-opted by somebody else and merchandised against his will. So, Case, man, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Calvin and Hobbes. What a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to go back and look at those strips. And this has been on kind of my short list of things I've wanted to talk about on this show for a long time. So I'm glad you brought it up. Case, tell the good, you've already mentioned at the top what your podcasts are. Where can they find your stuff?
Yeah. So this was a true delight. So thank you again for having me on. The opportunity to spend time talking about a comic strip from 28 years ago, Jesus Christ, is not a thing I get all the time. And so I really appreciate the opportunity, because normally what I deal with in terms of my online presence is, again, the Men of Steel podcast, which is a Superman show, Another Pass, which is a movie show. And if you want to find me on the socials, if you want to go to the site formerly known as Twitter, I'm there at Case Aiken. On BlueSky, I'm at Case Aiken. Instagram, I'm Quetzalcoatl5 because I refuse to give up my AIM screen name from high school. That's the last vestige. Well, that and Twitch, but like, I'm not like I watch people on Twitch. I'm not like on Twitch, but yeah. So the Instagram Quetzalcoatl5, everywhere else is going to be at Case Aiken. Any socials that pop up, or you can find me at the CPOV Discord. You can find a link at certainpov.com. You can also find all the podcasts I work on there. But come check that out. It's a great place for conversation. Doug, you and I have had a chance to interact quite a bit, especially video game conversations. But like, you have a Mega Man avatar. It's pretty awesome. I love it. But we've had like lots of great conversations over there. It's a good rhythm. It's not like one of those Discord servers where like you post a comment and if you look away for 5 minutes, you have to like scroll for 20 minutes to like find your previous comment. It's a good rhythm of the conversation, and I'm around. I did just have a child, and so I'm a little less online than I was previously, for reasons of lack of sleep. But
I can relate.
But if you at me, I will. I will get back to you, and I'm always happy to engage about all the nerd stuff, because I'm a big nerd, and thank God for the internet, because I thought I was so alone, like Calvin, for such of my life, and then I found all of y'all. So thank you, and please check out my stuff.
Yeah, it's a great island of misfit toys for sure. So to do a quick bit of admin on our side, if of course you like the show, and of course at Case's shows as well, please go rate and review them, tell friends about them, and all that stuff. See, if you want us in the socials, we are still on the Hell site, formerly known as Twitter. So we're there at NostalgiaPod. You can find us on Threads or Instagram as NostalgiaMarcanon. And I would recommend following us on Instagram, because that's where I post all the bonus stuff. So go there. That so far has been a safe lifeboat away from the whims of evil billionaires for now. And then let's see. If you have thoughts on our recent episodes, so obviously on Calvin and Hobbes, our last episode on doing impressions, which is sort of a different beat. Before that was Mega Man 2. And coming up next, I believe, as my son tries to bang down the door, is Ratchet and Clank. And after that, I'm not sure. Our schedule has been thrown totally into whack by the strike going on with the writers and actors. So we're feeling things out as we go.
But solidarity. Again, Another Pass is currently on hiatus for just that reason, because it's a movie show. So we stand.
Yeah. All right, man. Case, thanks again for coming on, man.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me.
That was a delight. All right, so until next time, that is one more entry in the Nostalgium Arcanum.
When I was younger, my imagination kept me sane. I didn't have any friends, so I created one. I constructed entire planets for myself. But as I grew up, I tried to leave childish things behind. My imagination had other ideas, and my daydreams, once harmless, slowly turned into a hellish reality.
There's something wrong with Calvin.
There's always been something wrong with him.
Do you believe in the devil? A supreme evil being dedicated to the corruption and destruction of man?
I'm not sure that man needs the help.
Look, where do you think these daydreams are coming from? Your imagination is part of you.
I can't control it.
Well, you have to. If these manifestations are real now, they'll tear you apart.
Any monsters under the bed tonight?
No. No.
I'd hate to have to torch one.
You have a flamethrower.
Close enough.
It knows I'm growing up. It's fighting back. Evolving. And I don't think I can stop it.
I'm not sure you want to.
Things are getting worse. Hobbes is gone. He's somewhere inside my mind. I've got to go after him.